Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm going to be talking about the Duel 2. And as a season, this is definitely a mid-tier season, but when you compare it to the seasons that are around it, especially the island and the ruins, I felt like a season like this was needed. A lighter season that wasn't so vile and toxic, and this is ironic because the first episode has the biggest fight known to man on the show. But after the first episode, it's pretty calm and serene. I like that they brought a decent amount of the Era 1 people who weren't known for their vileness for the most part, and they brought a different feeling to the show. At the same time, they definitely brought a decent amount of the Era 2 people who really weren't established up to this point. So these are people who either did one or two seasons or didn't really make it far on other seasons. But it definitely caused for an imbalance in the cast, or especially the gameplay, where a select group of people dominated from the very beginning to the very end. And while the underdogs did try to make the moves, nothing was really accomplished, and there wasn't a whole lot of drama to circumvent it, and they couldn't win anything. So, when it comes to the gameplay at least, it was pretty boring. But there were some dynamics that were kind of interesting enough that kind of puts this season above the lower to mid tier seasons. And I really do like the dual format in general, but they kind of screwed it up here somewhat because so many of the challenges were partnered and it's the same people partnering up. But in general, having individual seasons where there's one male and one woman winner definitely is one of the stronger ones. You kind of had to hold your own and you could call out anyone if you were nominated. So, yeah, this is definitely not a season that I'm going to rewatch over and over and over again. But I do think it's a fine, palatable enough season in a toxic period during the challenge. So the cast arrives in New Zealand. Paula is still salty about last season. Mark is back after a long retirement and shades himself for being around before TV and stuff was around. Tori and Brad come back for a final time before they settle down. Rachel insists that what happened with Jen on the island will stay on the island, which hasn't aged well, and Eric wants to prove himself after the final on the Gauntlet 3. I have to say that a lot of the late Era 1 people started, I don't want to say retiring, but they started getting married and having kids around this point in time, so you start to see some of that shift here. TJ explains the process, and it's essentially the same as the last duel, but it will be the final six who goes to the final instead of the final four. Everyone arrives to the house, and Derek is still in an on and off, again, 2.5 year relationship, and Paula is eyeing Dunbar, who she has become great friends with, and I guess this is why nothing goes on between Derek and Paula here, compared to, I believe, the Gauntlet 3, if I remember correctly. Ryan and Davis are making out with one another, and it seems like they are hooking up in the bed, though we see Davis make out with Brooke as well. I don't know why so many gay men do this, where they just randomly make out with women just for the fun of it, but I guess. Especially the ones on TV who do this. I know it's just like a common theme. Anyways, DM explains about how she had to break up with CT after how he treated her on the Gauntlet 3, and honestly, good for her. And she said that maybe in 5 years they'll be good for one another, but she also wants to focus on her career. We see her speak to him, but he gives her nothing. But the house realizes that CT and Siobhan hooked up with one another, and she's keeping mum because she's a grown woman. And honestly, that's fair to Siobhan. She doesn't owe any of them anything. And CT isn't confirming or denying it either. Everyone is dressing in costumes and partying, where Paula decides to wear a poorly aged Pocahontas outfit, and Adam is speaking to DM about the supposed rumor of CT and Siobhan hooking up, and CT is watching them speak. Honestly, neither one of them owed DM anything, so seeing her react so poorly to this, and everyone calling her for it, who cares, in my opinion. Anyways, DM speaks about it to Katie, and she outright tells DM about the hookup. DM confronts CT about hooking up with Siobhan, and he doesn't give a fuck, essentially, though he says that she told him 5 years, and Did she really expect him to wait around for 5 years? He approaches Adam, and it leads to the infamous fight where Adam calls him a coward. Adam throws something at him. Ironically, Brad confirmed very recently that Adam threw a can of soda on CT, and CT outright Molly whoops his ass like no other. And all of the men who are very buff and strong try to hold CT back, but they can't. They are throwing hands in the room and completely wrecking it, and not even production could hold CT back. They are throwing hands, they are both outside, and they continue fighting as CT wants to smash his head and eat it. Obviously, CT and Adam are sent home. Wow, is all I have to say. Obviously, they flash back to this fight all the time on the show and other promo stuff, and after understanding the issues from the real world season about 6 or 7 years prior to this, if my memory and timeline is correct, it seems like this was bound to happen. CT has mentioned that his brother was unalived and toe tagged shortly before the season, and he really shouldn't have been on the season, and sorry to him and his brother and his loved ones for that happening. And he was in a really bad place during the season, but his departure here definitely leaves a hole in things, since a lot of the other guys are not the biggest personalities who get into drama. Adam got his ass kicked. Nothing else to it, no way around it. But in a weird way, I think this fight gave him a bit more longevity on the show when it comes to being cast again. Everyone is talking about the aftermath of the fight, and Chiffon does not see why everyone is so obsessed with who she has sex with. Evan and Paula agree to protect one another for as long as they can, especially since they are good friends outside of the show. We get two replacements, and Anissa can tell from the stockings that one of them is a black guy, so we have Nehemiah and MJ as the replacements for CT and Adam. Last Man Standing is the challenge, which is essentially a rugby challenge based on gender, and they're separated into two teams. Evan and Robin win for their genders, and Nick feels injured because a man, it might have been Eric, fell on him. And unlike the last duel, the winners have time to plot their lineup, and they don't have to choose it right after the challenge. And I don't know about this change, since I feel like the group can essentially rig this in their favor. But I guess on the last duel, they planned the lineup before the challenge, so I guess it doesn't make that much of a difference. Anyways, Robin wants to protect MJ as he campaigned to her, where Evan has his alliance with Mark, Brad, and Landon, which will run the season, that he has to protect. It ends up with Ryan and Chiffon going into the duel. And I also forgot to mention that a man and a woman are getting sent in each round, compared to just being individual, like not last season, but the last duel, where Ryan chooses the rookie Nick and Siobhan chooses Anissa, which infuriates Anissa to no other. So, the guys play elevator and the women play back off. And elevator is essentially where you have to pull yourself up while you're on a platform, and back off is where you have to take the hook from your opponent, and hook it onto the circle up top, where Anissa is ranting to Rachel and Siobhan intentionally wanted to take out a veteran. Ryan easily defeats Nick, and we have a pretty physical Anissa beating Siobhan. And the same thing would happen in another matchup of this game later on in the season, which is pretty fun, and Anissa's talking her shit at the same time. Nick really wasn't notable to me, and he didn't even get much screen time outside of his random injury, and I'm shocked he comes back for another season after this. Siobhan got laid and had people pressed and bothered, but it was clear that the show wasn't for her, and we'll see that in her other two seasons. But it is crazy that she has done the most seasons out of this rookie class, which just shows how weak the rookie class from the season really is. Ryan and Robin are talking about his victory, and he also wants to go after one of the big dogs if he is chosen last, where Robin finally wants to win a season, since I think this is her 7th season so far. Yeah, this is her 7th season, I think. Anissa, Rachel, Katie, and I think DM are making fun of Robin and calling her crazy. So clearly her reputation just permanently was on the decline at this point with the cast, or the alumni. MJ is talking about being away from his wife and child. Brad is comforting him while Mark is randomly brushing his teeth in the kitchen, which was just so odd. So MJ is either going to win a challenge or go into elimination. Or at least that's what I'm predicting. The challenge is called Freezing as Puck, where everyone is paired into guy-girl pairings. One of them has to sit on an ice, where the other pushes them to a point goal. And I think this is a relatively fun challenge. And of course, they're giving eye candy to both genders. Fan service, I should say. And of course, TJ has to make the guys wear Speedos and the women wear bikinis. And I do give the men of this cast props where they didn't chicken out like they did on the Inferno 3. And the two pairs are divided into teams where the majority alliance are together, essentially. After one team wins, which is the majority, they split into halves where they have to compete with one another. Mark and Rachel ends up winning the challenge, and they save their alliance, of course, where Rachel plans to save Anissa and Mark wants her to choose Landon. MJ speaks to Evan about trying to get Paula to pick him since Evan is going to pick Paula, and Paula is speaking to Ryan about whether she should pick him or not. Evan confronts Paula about her telling MJ that she is going to speak to him, though now she wants to choose either Ryan or Dunbar, and she's getting very defensive with MJ and Evan about this. MJ gets frazzled and is trying to tell Ruthie to vote a certain way, and how she should pick Dunbar, who will then pick DM, which rubs Ruthie the wrong way. Paula is plotting with the other alliance, though it will cause Robin to be on the outs, where she picks Dunbar in the lineup, which fucks up the plan. Evan is pissed off and tells her that she fucked up, and she is now a target. It ends up with Robin and MJ being in the duel, where they pick Kimberly and Ryan, and the latter is pissed off because he was just in elimination. The majority alliance tells Evan that he needs to cut Paula loose for fucking up the plan. Duel pole dance is the elimination where they have to climb the pole on opposite sides and ring the bell up top. I do like this elimination, though we've seen different variations of it since, and Kimberly does end up beating Robin. MJ and Ryan play pushover, where they have pads where they have to push the others off the platform, and it really is no contest with MJ just beating Ryan. Brad and Landon talk about the Paula mess, especially since it came off as sporadic, and we have Evan and Paula talking about this, where Landon tells Brad that he doesn't trust Evan at all. And I noticed that this season, it really seems like the alliance is Landon, Mark, and Brad, and everyone's kind of just there. Honestly, I don't have much to say about Robin or Ryan in the season. I feel like they get the usual content that they get, being on the out and all, but you can tell that they're kind of on their last legs with their challenge careers, and there just wasn't much there for either of them. At least Ryan got laid this time, but it seems like this continues the narrative of crazy Robin that will follow her throughout the rest of her career, and would unfortunately tip over into her real life. Everyone is drinking and having fun, with Brooke having a good old time, flashing her boobs, and people are talking about how great of a party girl she is, and it's very convenient that they're showing her now, clearly indicating that she's probably in danger. Davis and Nehemiah are talking about how they need to take out the big dogs. Paula is also in the conversation, and she is hoping that he is having her back, and by he, I am referring to Evan. Speaking of Evan, he essentially talks poorly about Paula to Brad and Landon, and neither one of them really trust her. All Shook Up is a challenge where they have to walk and hold onto two ropes and shake off your opponents, and I found this to be a pretty fun challenge to watch, where we have some nice physical contact between some of the players. But this ends up with Ruthie and Landon winning the challenge. Of course, Landon and Ruthie talk about the people they want to protect, and Landon has a lot of people that he wants to protect, since he's aligned with many people. This line ends up with Brooke and Davis going to the duel, and Paula is pissed off that Evan threw her under the bus. Davis picks the quote-unquote leader, Evan, and I really don't think he was a leader at all. I just think he had a worse social game than the others in that alliance. And Brooke picks Brittany. Paula tells Davis to send Evan's ass home, and Evan ends up hearing this, and he was right beside her essentially, which was a pretty funny moment. Evan confronts Davis about picking him, and Davis essentially thinks that Evan is annoying as hell, which is one of the reasons, and Nehemiah regrets his choice in the lineup, since Davis is in the elimination, and if he chose someone else, Davis would have been safe. Or, in theory, Davis probably would have been chosen. Anyways. Brooke and Brittany play back off, and Brooke knows that she is screwed since she hates physical contact and she does end up losing to Brittany. Evan and Davis play spot on, where they have to climb a wall to place 16 pieces in the wall, and Evan does beat Davis. Evan attempts to hash it out with Paula since he didn't like her commentary, and she ends up crying to Jen, who gives her a pep talk, which is pretty nice, and Nehemiah calls Evan a bitch to a few others, but not to Evan's face, and I guess it makes sense why they eventually became rivals. Brooke seems like a fun enough personality, but it is clear that the show just isn't for her, and she can't keep up physically or mentally, so I'm not shocked that she never comes back. Davis does get laid, so props him for that, and he tried to take a shot against the big alliance, but he wasn't a very notable person this season, so I'm not shocked he only has one more season after this. We start off the episode with Evan randomly hanging out with a bunch of animals, and Tori is ranting about how she is annoyed with the others, and the environment is really getting to her. Nehemiah and Ruthie are talking about how the same people are at the top and the bottom, and he knows that he is in danger. Katie is wrestling with a bunch of people, and we see Jen and Rachel talking again, despite them being on icy terms again. Jen is heartbroken that they're not as close this season, and Rachel is very confused, since she does not want to go back to deal with Jen ghosting her after the season. Isn't this the typical story of lesbian/bisexual woman relationships or encounters? Losing My Mind is the challenge where they're in pairs yet again, and they have to wear a bobblehead while going down some trail and making a puzzle in the end. This challenge was kind of ridiculous with the bobblehead and all, but it really was a standout overall. Landon and Brittany win the challenge, though we see Jen's shoulder and arm is tense and could seriously be injured. So after seeing the doctor, they tell her to not compete anymore, but she doesn't quit, clearly. Nehemiah creates a shrine for himself, and he speaks to Jen about the situation, and we get a bunch of weird comments about people reacting to Nehemiah's spirituality, which kind of just rubbed me the wrong way. The winning pair create their chain of safety, and they see Nehemiah's quote of the day, where Dunbar, Landon, and Evan, though he really wasn't around this point, think that Nehemiah is targeting it against other people, and they call him all types of weird. Ruthie and Katie talk about how they're at the bottom and what they need to do, with Rachel, Brittany, and Tori being the top 3 women, as they are always paired with Mark, Landon, and Brad. The chain of safety ends up with Jen and Nehemiah going into the duel, and they choose Katie and Evan to go against them. Evan is pissed off that he's going in yet again, and there's some clear tension between the two guys. Eric and Ruthie are training Katie regarding what to do in the elimination, and Evan is complaining to Paula about Nehemiah being a coward, since he is physically tired from his last elimination, calls him an idiot, and he should have chosen someone else in the top. Nehemiah and Edwin compete in elevator, where the latter does beat the former. MJ makes some weird dog whistles in his confessionals about Nehemiah's weird faces, looks, and all of that, which is uncomfortable. Jen and Katie compete in pushover, where it is shockingly close, but the former does beat the latter. Nehemiah's quote of the day is ripped off by Evan, who took it off the door, which Jen didn't like, and we have Rachel and Jen wrestling, which turns into them hooking up in their bed, and the entire house is listening to them through several windows and doors. Katie has just kind of been there for some of her last few seasons, and she really wasn't memorable here, but I can see why she starts to get tired of doing the challenge after a while at this point. Nehemiah was an oddball, and it did not seem like he was very liked at all, though there's a lot about it that made me uncomfortable, but he didn't have much to do this season, despite his underdog arc. It is Brad and Eric's birthday, so everyone is having their fun, where we do see Dunbar and Paula get close, and a bunch of people are giving strip dances. Isaac and MJ are talking about how the former will be around for a while, and everyone draws things on him. Well, Landon clips his long-ass toenail while asleep, which he took 4 months to grow, and he holds this against Landon for the rest of the episode. DM and Ruthie help set up a room for Brad and Tori to keep the freak on, since they are not engaged, and to give them a boom boom room, if you know what I mean. Paula and Dunbar talked about the game, and they both know that they are on the out essentially, where Ruthie and Anissa talk about the game where Ruthie knows that she's in trouble, and Anissa promises that she will save Isaac, who will save Ruthie, but Anissa mentions in the confessional that she's essentially lying. Don't Let Go is a challenge where you are in partners and the woman is being harnessed over the bridge and the partner has to hold them by their hands, or else the woman will see 200 or they'll swing 250 feet in the air. And the women aren't even wearing helmets in this, which, really, producers? Mark and Rachel win the challenge, and we see more scrambling about the list, though Tori mentions that the people at the bottom have control of the game somehow, which I don't get. Unless she means that if they all work together, then they would have control, but this isn't like one of those formats where they all vote. I don't get what she means by this. Tori wants to make a move since she wants to change things up, but Brad sees it as not a good idea to rock the waves, and they are getting annoyed with one another. Rachel speaks to Ruthie and Brittany about the lineup, and Ruthie knows that Rachel is essentially lying because Rachel is saying, you know, a lot. And Rachel claims that Ruthie uses intimidation to make it far. And it seems like deflection to me since that's usually what Rachel does. But Rachel does see Ruthie as her biggest threat. Brad and Tori keep on arguing about their position, where she wants to change things up, and she sees him making the same move over and over and over again, where he feels like you need to pay back the people who are protecting you, and then he threatens to go into the duel while they're yelling at one another, and she says that he looks stupid, and honestly, it's no wonder why they eventually have a very messy divorce. Brad complains to MJ about his fiance, and Ruthie is pissed that Anissa did not pick Isaac, which calls for Isaac and Ruthie to go into the duel, which explains Ruthie and Anissa's tension on All Stars 1 over a decade later, since Ruthie is still holding on to this. The two decide to choose Landon and Kimberly to go into the duel, and Kim is injured due to the challenge, so she thinks that she's going to lose, and Landon thinks that it is a dumb move for Isaac to choose him. Landon and Isaac compete in Spot On, and Landon ends up beating Isaac, which Evan is not the happiest with since he sees Landon as his biggest threat. So I guess this is foreshadowing pertaining what eventually happens to Landon. Kimberly and Ruthie compete in Back Off, and Kimberly does beat Ruthie, where we do see Tori and Brad arguing and making up after the elimination. Isaac was pretty invisible until his final episode, where he was obsessed with Landon cutting his toe, though it's weird that he came back after like 5 or 6 years, and like 8 or 9 seasons, I don't even know. I can see why this is Ruthie's final season on the flagship. She isn't a big character, and she really isn't strategic, while the show has gotten more and more competitive with the social dynamics changing. She just really couldn't keep up, but clearly, like I mentioned earlier, we will see her on All Stars 1. Paula and Dunbar are arguing with one another. She calls him the R word, and everyone is watching their fight, where she mentions that everyone in the house hates him. This leads to Dunbar venting to Kimberly, and they both start trashing Paula, where he mentions that he would hook up with Tiffany if he was single. I honestly forgot he had a girlfriend. Though Anissa is claiming that they are hooking up, but it didn't seem like they were hooking up this time. Emphasis on this time. A bunch of the men get face masks to fill up the time, and Big Easy talks about having fun, and it's clear that he's going into elimination since he's getting this focus when he was essentially invisible throughout the season otherwise, and this has happened within his last few seasons. Paula is jealous that Dunbar and Kimberly are hanging out, and then continue arguing yet again, though he's telling her that he is her partner in the game and they won't turn on one another. Derek and Kimberly talk about the alliances in the house and how they're at the bottom, since a lot of the easy targets are now out. And this is also clearly foreshadowing. The challenge is Dangle Duel, where they have to climb a ladder very high in the air to get a flag in the quickest time. And it is in partners again, where it is essentially the same partners as usual. And this is a huge issue that a lot of people have with the season, where a lot of people tend to assume that it's a partner season, despite it being a dual season, and I do think they should have changed it up a bit more. The challenge in itself was relatively interesting enough, and Landon and Brittany barely beat Mark and Rachel by 11 seconds, but it doesn't make a difference, and the hierarchy is kept in place. Neither one of them wants to create a list anymore to indicate who should be at the bottom, but they just wanted to save their allies. And Paula ends up watching Dunbar and Kimberly hook up in the bushes, and they try to hide it, where she's literally, and by she I mean Kimberly's literally insistent on hiding in the bushes, and Paula is like taunting her like a mother or a teacher to get out of the bushes. And she ends up teasing Dunbar that she's going to tell his girlfriend, and honestly it's a pretty fun moment. Eric speaks to Brad about not being in the bottom, and Brad tells him that he's not going to be at the bottom. Paula decides to barge in on Kimberly and Dunbar snuggling and making out on the couch, covering their sheets, and she's pissed off yet again. Anyways, the lineup ends up with Derek and Kimberly going into the duel. Shocker! And Kimberly is actually shocked that Dunbar chose to save Paula over herself, but she clearly forgot that she's still a rookie. Derek chooses Eric and Kimberly chooses Jen to go into elimination. It was clear that Kimberly was going home here, since Jen got absolutely no screen time in the episode, especially up until this point. The men compete in dual pole dancing, where Derek beats Eric, despite the latter literally trying to use his weight to push Derek off several times, and the women compete in push over, which Jen already competed in, and Jen predictably beats Kimberly. MJ also makes fun of Jen for being a confused bisexual in the confessionals, and Paula is making fun of Dunbar for being sad about Kim's elimination, and she really doesn't care that he is hearing her. Eric has the same old content that he always gets every single season, but he didn't get much screen time this season, which honestly isn't out of the ordinary either. I know he has a few more seasons, but I just don't have much to say about him here. I'm kind of over his shtick. I actually pretty much shocked that I enjoyed Kimberly slightly during the season with a weird love triangle, though that only got focused in this episode, and winning a few eliminations, despite not being the biggest personality, though she isn't the smallest personality either. Paula, at this point, realizes that no one has her back, and she doesn't care about Dunbar's feelings, where Anissa is talking to Tori and Brad about the end being close, where she realizes that she's in the middle regarding performance and alliances. DM and Dunbar are talking, and he is talking about Kimberly, and he's missing her, though it's only been 2 days since she left. And the fact that they're showing Anissa in this way is also a sign that she's going to go in. She talks about how, I think this is DM I'm referring to. DM is talking about how there's only 4 more challenges left, and she tells him that he needs to prepare to go in every single time, because it's clear that at this point he is at the bottom of the hierarchy. MJ is talking about how the next 20 years of his life is set up, and there are plans for a second child after this, so it's clear what's going to happen with this. Burnt is the challenge, and it's finally an individual challenge, where they're in the air and they have to pull a rope quickly, or else they will drop, and it's really not an exciting challenge to watch whatsoever. Landon wins, to the shocker of no one, despite Brad being in the lead for most of the challenge, and Brittany also wins, to the shocker of no one, despite Rachel being in the lead for most of this as well. We have Evan and Mark talk about how they and Brad, as well as Landon, but he isn't in the room, need to get to the final together, and MJ, Dunbar, and Derek are at the bottom, and Landon doesn't care about any man but Mark and Brad, so here you kind of understand the hierarchy. With the 3 men who were mentioned clearly end up going home next, Landon kind of sees Evan as the 4th, with Landon himself, Mark, and Brad being at the very, very, very top. And it kind of makes sense just based on how the dynamics have been throughout the season. Paula and Dunbar are going into the duel, and they choose Anissa, as Paula and Anissa have done several eliminations together up until this point, and Dunbar chooses MJ to go into elimination, and this is clearly where the edit was going from the beginning. Dunbar is randomly punching things in the house, so people think he's kind of crazy. Evan gives MJ advice about the elimination, and we have a few people talking about how mentally weak Dunbar is, though we see Dunbar and Paula argue again, since he doesn't feel like she believes in herself, and Kimberly comes up yet again, where he doesn't like how Paula treats him, and Paula literally doesn't care. And I feel like she said this over and over and over again over the last 2 episodes. So he rants to Evan and Derek, and of course Evan agrees, where he speaks to Paula, who then freaks out on Evan for abandoning her early on in the season, and she knows no one cares about her, despite him trying to make it seem like he cares for her. And honestly, it's kind of giving Coral and Evan flashbacks from the Gauntlet 3. Anissa ends up giving MJ cornrows before the elimination, where they play Elevator, where MJ predictably beats Dunbar, and the woman can beat and back off, where Anissa beats Paula, so Dunbar and Paula leave together, which is very ironic. Honestly, I really enjoyed Dunbar and Paula this season, despite them pissing me off in their prior outings, especially last season. Their drama was the only bit of drama for a decent amount of the season, and I just found the both of them and their dynamic to be funny as hell. Both of them were on the outs despite being in the majority last season, and I do think that the increase of Era 1 people this season caused a different dynamic that did not benefit them. This is the season where Paula really gave main character energy. DM is dancing drunk in her lingerie, and Evan is over DM while making some shady comments about her lack of intelligence in his confessionals. Anissa is eavesdropping on Rachel and Jen kissing in the washroom, and she's getting jealous, where she was close to Rachel in the beginning of the season, and that changed once the latter started getting with Jen. Mark and Evan talk about how one of them needs to win the season, and Anissa confronts Rachel about their 7-year history since the first battle of the seasons, and Anissa does not respect how things went down. Okay, so I know Rachel and Anissa dated or hooked up at some point, but I don't know when this happened, and I'm assuming it was an off-camera fling, and she doesn't appreciate Anissa trying to get in the middle of things. Anissa rants to some of the others, and they're all kind of just silently siding with Rachel. And Jen overhears Anissa talking about them. And it's ironic that this Rachel and Anissa dynamic still kind of exists today, where even in season 40, Rachel kind of just left Anissa to hang and dry, and their history was spread up yet again. Derek and Evan are talking about the stress of the game, and we do see Jen confront Anissa before the challenge about trashing her and how it is none of Anissa's effing business. But Anissa just sees this as Jen being fearful, and she cannot tell her how to handle her feelings. Sorry. Jen cannot tell Anissa how to handle her, i.e. Anissa's feelings, and this is all just kind of ridiculous. And that happening right before the challenge, too, is just something. Upside Down is the challenge where they have to go across a rope and back, where they are being suspended upside down to get the dolls of some sort, where they need to swing it as well. And I found this to be a decent enough challenge, though I would be scared shitless doing it. Landon wins yet again. It feels good for making Mark second yet again, and Rachel also wins the challenge, but she knows that she can't save Jen, since it will ruin all of her alliances in the game, and she's definitely letting Jen get led to the slaughter to get her head cut off with this. And Jen is obviously and rightfully pissed off at this. Evan is worried about Derek not telling anyone who he is getting called. Evan is worried about Derek not telling anyone who Derek is going to call into elimination, and it seems like he thinks it's going to be him, and he definitely has a right to feel that way. Derek and Jen are going into the duel, with Evan and DM also being chosen, as Derek doesn't choose MJ due to his kid, which honestly I just kind of found ridiculous. And Jen knows Anissa will kick her ass, despite all the shit talk and the fighting that they did in the episode, so Jen didn't want the smoke, essentially. Evan is giving a pep talk from Anissa, where Evan mentions how he is shocked that his only friend is the black girl witch. I'm gonna leave that alone. But Evan does beat Derek in Spot On, where the latter climbed the wall, and Jen's luck in Push Over, which is the third time she did this elimination, ends once DM shockingly beats her. Anissa and Rachel hash it out once again, and it's a very odd interaction overall. Derek is a nice enough dude, and I didn't mind his presence here, but he really doesn't offer anything competitively, strategically, or personality-wise, so I see why this is his last season, despite making it far in this season. Jen definitely had an interesting storyline with Rachel, and I did have continuity from last season, where her conflict with Anissa was interesting too. It's a shame that this is the last season where Jen is somewhat sane and normal, and the injuries that she got earlier on in the season literally never comes up again, so that was kind of just something. A fashion show is being held, and the guys are judging the woman, and an almost nude Landon for some reason, who are wearing a bunch of weird costumes, and Mark is hosting in a weird-ass accent that I can't pinpoint anywhere. But everyone is tired of getting to the end, but not being at the very end. MJ is speaking to Evan about his child calling for him and not being there, and Evan kind of knows that MJ is going to call him in, so he wants him to go in and to go home. We have a huge argument between Brad and Tori because while they are ready to get married and settle down, she does not like that he doesn't have a job, and Brad doesn't think it's appropriate to bring this up now, since it's an issue outside of the game, and she takes off his ring before walking off, which pisses Brad off even more. DM has to comfort Tori, and Brad vents to the other guys, where people are wondering if she's going to quit or not. Brad comes in to speak to Tori while she claims that he is intense and she is calm, and there's definitely a lack of self-awareness there on Tori's end. And he's not mad that she took off the ring. Sorry. He is very mad that she took off the ring, since it just showed a really bad side of her, and they go for another round of arguing, which is just very exhausting at this point. Spelling error is the challenge, where they have to spell words high up in the air, and if you spell it wrong, you will fall out of the challenge. I feel like we've seen elements of the challenge in many other seasons after this, so I'm kind of just ambivalent towards this one. Rachel and Evan win the challenge, and MJ takes some shots at Evan in the confessional about being a shady fuck, essentially, and DM doesn't feel good about Tori being at the bottom because she feels like Tori will pick her, essentially. Tori and Brad are worried about them both being in the duel, since that's been the case with many other pairs this season. Rachel wants to go to the end with Brittany and Anissa, so she wants Tori to go in the duel and to go home, and she hopes that Anissa picks her since Anissa will be at the bottom of the chain, and MJ essentially refuses to campaign since he feels like it is pointless. MJ and Anissa pick the engaged couple to go into the duel, and Tori makes a comment about Anissa doing Rachel's dirty work, but of course she goes mute when Anissa confronts her and asks her to repeat herself. Landon and Brittany feel like they are already in the finals, and it seems like Anissa and Rachel are in a good place again. Tori tries to clarify it with Anissa in front of everyone, and Anissa doesn't believe it, where it causes a bit of an argument between the two of them, where Tori's just glad, and she claims that she did all that because she didn't want Anissa to touch her in a physical elimination, which is why she was cheering, and Anissa doesn't buy any of this bullcrap at all. Anissa and Tori play in Elevator, where Anissa does beat Tori, and Brad and MJ compete in dual pole wrestling, where Brad does beat MJ. Tori was a train wreck with her relationship drama with Brad, and it's a clear sign that she doesn't really care for the challenge overall. But it did make the season a bit more interesting in comparison, especially since a lot of the others weren't doing too much in the season. And their dynamic was one of the most consistent elements of the season. I do think this is MJ's most memorable flagship season from a character point of view, as he was a bit funnier in the confessionals, but he still wasn't the most interesting, and it seemed like he wanted to move on to settle into his family life. He was an alternate who made it on for 2 of his 3 flagship seasons, so it's clear that he wasn't much of a priority, and he's probably going to be off the show soon. But his story continues on All Stars, but that was done once he was getting a divorce. The Final Four realized that they are not going to the final, but TJ did mention, or he says that he said in the beginning that 6 people will go to the final in the beginning, so there will be another duel. I don't know if when he mentions that he said it in the beginning, like on the first episode, I don't remember if he actually said it then or if it was a voiceover done afterwards to make it look like he said it then, but that's kind of just besides the point. But anyways, because Anissa and Brad won the last elimination, they chose the duel that the guys and the girls will compete in. The guys are sitting around and they agree to write their names on a paper. When Landon leaves to get pens and paper, Evan looks at Brad and Mark, which is a sign to send in Landon, and the women easily vote in DM. Landon tells Brad that he's going to call him into elimination, and he is stunned that he was chosen to go in when he wasn't even around. Landon and Brad compete in Back Off, and this is a controversial elimination with some of the calls TJ made, and this elimination is very physical between the two men, with Landon roughing Brad off to the point where he's like wrestling him instead of going for the point, which gives him a few DQs for tackling, and then Brad knocks Landon's ring, which causes him to run to clip his ring, though some people think that Brad should be DQ'd, but a part of me feels like people are only saying this because this is the only time Landon has ever lost in the challenge. So apparently the real reason why the guys did this was because Landon was the only one not in the deal to split the money with the finalists. And they wanted Evan to win. And I'll explain more of that later. Brittany and DM play in pushover where Brittany easily beats DM. Landon was definitely brought in to be a more calming force this season, and he was off for several years/season up until this point. He did dominate the challenges, which shows his force, but it also wasn't the most interesting to watch, especially since he won like over half of them, and it seemed like he would steamroll himself to a win, but he did have heart here. It was interesting seeing DM do a CT really without, sorry. It was interesting seeing DM do a season really without CT, of course after meeting him, where she did fresh meet before she ever met CT, and while she didn't have a big edit here, she wasn't a ghost like her last season, and she really did just have a good spirit and positivity vibe to her. The final is called Final Challenge, where they will be partnered at times, and they start running to some black rope to get across the sea, though Anissa's almost blown by the current in the water. They then have to walk above a hill and complete spot on, then dual pole dancing, where they ride a bike after completing it. They have to then chain to a circular ring with a female partner, or with a partner of the opposite gender, I should say, and then walk to their next destination, with Brad and Rachel being partnered, Evan and Brittany being partnered, where he is yelling at her, and Mark and Anissa are partnered. They then have to dig out of a dumpster to get a key to separate themselves. Mark and Anissa are taking their time, and while it's seen as Mark supporting Anissa and being a holy gentleman, the real reason why he did it is because he wanted Evan to gain a lead so he could win, since Canadians do not have their winnings taxed. So if they're splitting the money, everyone gets more money, with Evan winning with it being not taxed, rather than if Brad or Mark won it and they split the money. They would all get less money. Elevator is the final part of the challenge where Rachel wins and Evan barely beats Brad. Anissa definitely brought a lot of drama to the season, which was definitely needed from Siobhan to Rachel, Selma to Ruthie, Jen, and Tori. Despite that, her lack of endurance has not changed whatsoever, and it seems like this will be one of the final times where she actually had a really strong season all around. Mark comes out of his first retirement, and I do think his presence was needed as a softer, more palatable season after last season. He made his old jokes, gave frat boy energy, and steamrolled as usual, but as long as his sporadic appearances, and not him doing this every single season, and like doing 5 seasons straight, he's fine enough. Brad definitely had a strong season, though while he didn't perform really well in dailies, especially compared to his allies, he did have a strong final performance, and his relationship with Tori was in the front line this season compared to their last season together. But him getting second at another dual season is just very ironic. Brittany is definitely the rookie of the season, with winning several dailies, a few eliminations, and getting second place overall. At the same time, she was really boring and had no character/personality moments on this show, so I am fine with her being a one and done, though I would not have minded if she came back. Rachel definitely had a strong performance this season, as she was never in the duel but did well in most of the challenges, had a drama with Anissa, and her continued romance with Jen that continued from last season. After having a poor last season, she definitely redeemed herself here, and proved that she could hold her own without Veronica and Tina. Evan is definitely a lot more tolerable here without Kenny and Bananas, though you can tell that he was a lot meaner in his commentary and confessionals in general, and was getting immersed in becoming an MTV character. Though his win is somewhat underwhelming because the others essentially give it to him due to non-taxable deductions. This season is palatable. It's like soup. It's something nice that can warm your stomach, but it's not really going to fill you, and once it goes through your system, you're kind of back to where you were to begin with. A bit hungry. So, the cast was decent-ish. There weren't as many drama starters, but we did get a lot of veteran OGs come back. We had some of the reoccurring people from Era 2 here, though some of the big faces were missing, but that was clearly done intentionally. And a lot of the underdogs, or the people who didn't do many seasons, really weren't that established and didn't get much to do on the season. And strategically, it was definitely a boring steamroll with just one side dominating over everyone, and that wasn't fun. But some of the interactions that happened throughout the season really helped bring things along and make things a bit more interesting to watch. So you have A season with interesting interactions, a lot of good challenges and eliminations, and a strong format. You can definitely see why some people have this season as high. But honestly, this is definitely a mid-tier season. I don't know where I would put this in comparison to a lot of their era two seasons. Because even compared to the Inferno 3, which wasn't really that exciting or interesting strategically, there's a lot more memorable moments in this season compared to that season. But when you think of it as a Duel sequel, this season is definitely a huge disappointment, as the Duel 1 was just iconic all the way around. Drama, stand up characters, a lot of interesting interactions, so on and so forth. So now, after this season, we're getting to the end of Era 2, where the toxicity definitely increases. We're starting to see the team season start to come closer to an end, and a lot of the people that defined Era 2 would slowly start making their way out at around these late Era 2 seasons, which would somewhat carry on into early Era 3, and a lot of the people who were introduced in late Era 1, so like Season 9, Season 10, they either left the show or retired for good, took very long hiatuses so they could get married, have children, and raise their children at their youngest ages. The Ruined is definitely going to be a season to watch since there's a whole lot of controversy on the actual episodes and behind the scenes. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with content soon on both channels. Bye!